examine where commissioning typically goes wrong. Lastly, we will cover the updates to the KP commissioning standard, including monitoring-based commissioning and the clean bill of health. Please type in your questions in the chat box during the presentation. We will read and answer the questions at the end during Q&A, and if time runs out, we'll answer by email.
We did start the recording, by the way.
Okay. Here's some metrics. So here's the pass. We started using eBuilder in 2017, and that gave us the ability to track all our projects. In our reviews, we were asking these two questions. Are projects who are supposed to be doing commissioning doing it right? And what is the level of quality of commissioning outcomes? There were 427 projects in 2018. 143 of those required commissioning. 38 of the 143 submitted final commissioning reports. Of the 38, 4 met the minimum standard for completion. So for 2018, we had a 10% success rate. Here's the commissioning data from 2019, and it shows a great improvement. The result was a 69% success rate of filed reports, 57% success for projects requiring commissioning. Here's where we are for 2020, 72% success for filed reports and 57% for projects. Now I'll hand it over to Travis to go over common factors of unsuccessful and successful commissioning.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the things we looked at this year in the 2020 program was to try to figure out, what can we look at in order to determine success. And the first one was the commissioning plan. My team spends a lot of time checking commissioning plans, and so I wanted to validate that that's actually worth it. Does a commissioning plan indicate success pretty well? And it does. So I think it's fair to say, based on the data here, if you don't have a commissioning plan, if the project doesn't have a commissioning plan, then that's a pretty darn good indicator that we're not going to see a final commissioning report. So 73% of projects that do have a commissioning plan wind up filing a report. So ultimately, having a commissioning plan posted with the project is a pretty good indicator of success. 75% is pretty good. The next question that I want to know is whether or not my team's review provides any indicator that the project is going to be successful in its final commissioning effort. And it does. It's only a slight uptick. So to have your commissioning plan approved by FSPDE, that's Facilities Strategy Planning and Design Engineering, which is my team, it increases the success for about 15%, but that's 15%. We'll definitely take that 15% improvement. Next slide. So the next thing that we looked at in this year, and this is the 2020 data, is to actually try to find out for the projects that filed commissioning reports or didn't file commissioning reports, where did we actually go off the rails? So when we have non-compliance in our final commissioning, and we had a group of projects that we ultimately deemed non-compliant at the end of the year. And so when did we go off the rails in terms of our process? And you can see that, for the first batch there, the first way we can go off the rails is simply by not filing a commissioning report. But that's not actually the big one. The biggest one is to have unresolved issues. So that means that the project either didn't have an issues log, but there was only one of those, but most of them had an issues log, but then left issues unresolved. And part of our checklist at the end of commissioning is that all the issues in the issues log have to be resolved. And then the second big one is the trending. And so we had projects that either didn't do trending, we still had projects that didn't do trending, and then we also had projects who did trending, but then the trending ultimately fails at the data analytics phase. So what we're looking for is we're looking for projects that, having an issues log is a great thing, but we're looking for projects in order to be successful. We want all those issues to be resolved prior to turning it over to our owner. Doing trending is a great thing, but you have to pass the trending. Ultimately, we're looking for trending that shows that the systems work according to the design intent. And so those are the two big things that if you want to focus on success, make sure you have time to resolve your issues, make sure you do resolve your issues, and then make sure that you have a trending period in place. Nobody really passes trending, or I don't know, there was a couple projects that passed trending perfectly the first time around, but you do have to plan on some issues resolution according to the trends. But for the guys in the chat box, we are recording the meeting. And since the Teams meeting is public, the recording will also be public afterwards, and I'll be able to send out a link to that. Go ahead and hit the next slide. So just to review kind of how our process works internally, I know there's a lot of Kaiser project managers on the board, and so you probably know that there's a robot named Travis English who comes out of his cave about once a month and sends out action items. Please don't take those personally. It is a very robotic effort. We have a list of projects that are over a certain budget number, and if the schedule in eBuilder says that it's at this point, then we pretty much just trust it and send out the action items. So that has actually been quite successful in that it helps us to identify if you are a PM or a team manager and you get a request for a commissioning plan, you don't think your project requires commissioning, please just reply to that and say, hey, I don't think this project requires commissioning. It helps us to make that determination right up there. It also kind of helps us to escalate. When we see projects that do require commissioning and they don't have a commissioning plan and they're starting construction, then you're going to see us escalate that. And that's actually, that's done pretty good. We also ask for that final commissioning plan, and we let you know the status of the final commissioning plan. If we review the final commissioning plan and it doesn't meet our criteria, then you're gonna know about that. Hit the next slide. The other thing that all of our commissioning agents and project managers and designers alike should know is that we pretty much have a set of standard acceptance criteria, which are numeric and objective. And so we maintain that. We actually update it quite a bit. We just updated it this week. So we do have standard acceptance criteria. And I will say that ultimately, I think where our industry needs to go to is that the design engineer should be writing the acceptance criteria for the project and saying what the acceptable performance of the systems is as the design intent and the owner of the design intent. Unfortunately, at this point in time, our experience with the design engineers is that most of them just don't know how to write acceptance criteria for projects. And so we do have a stock set of acceptance criteria that we can issue out that are pretty darn good and applicable to most projects. So that's a tool that we have. Next slide. The other tool that we have, if you are a Kaiser project manager or involved at all in Kaiser project management, or if you're a commissioning agent that's providing proposals, is that the scope that goes into the RFP for the commissioning projects comes from my team. So the individual project managers don't have to write RFPs. They don't have to author scopes. Also, any of our contract managers don't have to author scopes. We have standard scopes of work for every project type that requires commissioning. If you are a commissioning provider and you get a request for proposal and it doesn't look like this, it doesn't have the acceptance criteria right in the RFP, then that scope didn't come from my team, and that means you're probably going to bid the wrong scope. So please push back. We should be using the standard scopes of work for all the projects that are being awarded. Next slide. I think that might be it for my section.
Yep.
So I believe now we push it over to Sandy.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. You can go to the next slide. So let's review Kaiser's 2020 commissioning standards. As we presented in the fall of last year, we have 4 new requirements. And we also have a new professional service agreement that all firms working for Kaiser will need to sign. These requirements, I hope, will put us in the industry leading category And we want our commissioning program to be industry leading. We're asking for connected commissioning, pre-assurance of controllers, controls design, and a clean bill of health from Clockworks. In the next few slides, we'll expand on these concepts and discuss them in more detail. Next slide, please. So this table shows the difference between traditional commissioning, the old KP commissioning standard, and the new 2020 Kaiser commissioning standard. You'll note that most of the requirements of traditional commissioning still apply to the new standard. The main differences are how we approach functional testing, trending, and data analytics. We still expect boots on the ground to verify specified equipment and systems are properly installed, observation of major equipment startup, including functional testing. Next slide, please. Connected commissioning and online data analytics is the way that, it's really the way the commissioning industry is heading. Connected commissioning will require the use of a data analytics package that connects to the BAS and does real-time trending and analysis. This gives us feedback on the performance of the system as the data rolls in. In other words, the system is performing analytics from the start. Once it goes live, analytics starts. This process was extremely useful in troubleshooting issues with rooftop unit performance and boiler performance at Hesperia, which was one of our recently built medical office buildings that was commissioned using the connected commissioning approach. Another real-time saving feature of our connected commissioning requirement is automated functional testing. By this, we mean the ability to put the building into full heating and then full cooling and analyze the system components to verify proper operation and adherence to the acceptance criteria. Finally, the data analytics will help us optimize the building during the first year of operation. You can also use our continuous commissioning platform, Clockworks, as your data analytics platform, but in that case, Clockworks would really need to be up and running very early in the project. Additionally, automated functional testing would have to be performed by the BAS. And let's go to the next slide. This really streamlines the old process of having the controls contractor perform the trending and then analyzing it and developing Excel spreadsheets. We don't want any more of that. We do not want you to receive the trending data and then perform analysis. We expect you to have a data analytics package once it goes live. Our standard also requires a plan B for connectivity. So plan A is, the KP IT network is up and running, and you can see the building system data on the network just like it will be for the life of the building. I'm sure some of you have worked on projects where KP IT wasn't ready on the day that you wanted to start functional testing. So if you need to, you carry a battery-powered controls server to the job site, connect it up with a mobile hotspot on a cell phone, and that's plan B. Plan A should always be KPIT. The commissioning agent must be connected at the start of functional performance testing, no exceptions, no matter what. Next slide. The third component that we're requiring is pre-assurance of controllers or bench testing. The way to think about it is that no controller should ever arrive on the job site without you being 100% confident that the network configuration is correct, the points are set up, and the programming is right. And by 100% confident, we don't mean that you have a strong belief. We mean that you've touched it, you've tested it, and you know it. We know this is a new concept, and there may be some of you thinking, oh my God, does that mean the whole controls package ships to my office? Am I supposed to connect every controller and test the whole network and all the points and the sequences before it goes to the job site? Yes, that's what it means. This also includes packaged equipment such as boilers, chillers, rooftop units, and so on. There's obviously some more creative and productive ways to do that, but it is what it is. That's what it means. Next slide. In the past, we've had enough experience with commissioning agents reviewing controls designs, commenting on the controls designs, critiquing the controls design, and as you can see from some of the data, that really hasn't worked so well. So we're making changes. In the 2020 standard, the commissioning authority will provide the controls design. The commissioning firm must have a professional engineer that will sign and seal the controls drawings. So the commissioning agent is now the author of the points list, the sequence of operation, and the specifications. We will allow a co-signature, meaning the commissioning agent and the engineer of record can co-sign the controls. The engineer of record still owns the system design and the basis of design. So system selection, system sizing, component sizing, energy modeling, all this is still the design. And the engineer of record owns that vision. So in reality, this is more of like I would call it an interactive design process. We don't want the engineer and the commissioning agent working in silos. They must work together. The controls design must include network configuration and communication design. We're also requiring the commissioning agent to be responsible to make sure that all of the components and controllers and the network configurations are coordinated and approved by KPIT. The controls design will also include naming conventions and quality assurance on the programming. So our commissioning agent will be providing the assurance that all of the points needed for validation of the design intent are in there. In other words, once the construction documents come out, there are no more comments, no more critiques, no more corrections. I mean, really, the design could almost be considered shop drawing quality. The commissioning agent is the full owner of the controls design and assures it will meet the design intent of the engineer of record. Oh, and an FYI, we're hoping to have a roundtable discussion about this topic at the Building Commissioning Association National Meeting, and I'm sure that will be a lively roundtable. Next slide. And you can go to the next one. Yeah, that's it. Kaiser Permanente implemented a national continuous commissioning platform, Clockworks, or KGS, to help monitor and track our buildings. We include this as part of all new construction projects and retrofits over a certain control dollar amount. So your controls design has to be compatible with the Clockworks platform. We expect that our commissioning provider to assist in the implementation of this platform and deliver a building that is fault-free on day one. That means when we plug in Clockworks, if it shows 100 faults, then you're not done. As the commissioning agent, you are responsible for a fault-free startup. And we call this the Clockworks Clean Bill of Health. And next slide. And that ends our presentation. Thank you very much. I think Glenn is going to moderate and we'll address some of your questions.
I've actually got them.
Oh, you've got them? Okay.
Yeah. No, you can just leave the slide deck up. I don't think we're going to use that. How late did we schedule this meeting to?
11:30.
Okay, good. So we got plenty of time. I'm going to run through the questions that are in the chat box, and I think I think what we have so far is relatively quick. Keep typing your questions into the chat box, and then and if we have time, then we will just open the mics and go to that. But let's roll through. So first off, the copy of the recording. We absolutely have this meeting is being recorded. My name is Travis English, and I was the owner of the meeting. The meeting went a little viral, I have to admit. I think we invited about 50 people, but there's about 120 on the line. So, email me back. I was the organizer, and if you need to get a copy of it and you're not able to see it in Microsoft Teams right afterwards, then we'll get that. Okay, so the first question that we kind of had was relative to, are we using Clockworks for the FPT trending? And the answer to that is that we have not successfully done so yet. So that's absolutely part of what we're working on within Kaiser and with the Clockworks team is the ability to try to get Clockworks connected to a building that's sort of in flight, usually before it's been connected over to KPIT, or having it connected to KPIT quick enough to be able to use Clockworks for the FPT. But so far, all of the connected commissioning that we've done has not been in the Clockworks engine. It's been using SkySparks And then we do have another vendor that uses something else. But so far, everything's been SkySparks. The other question that came up already is about the PSA. So what happens if your firm has a professional service agreement that you've signed with Kaiser that does not include the 2020 standard requirements? And the answer to that is that you need to update your master professional service agreement. The work authorizations that are getting issued out this year should have that master service agreement with Kaiser in order to reference the scope of work that's coming out this year. There's one or two firms that are exceptions to that because their master service agreements already have those scopes of works, but most of you are probably going to need to update your PSA with Kaiser contracts, and that contract is now available, so that you would work through your contract manager or your team manager in order to do that. We had a question about the metric of successful for the projects, and also a kind of a related question around substantial completion. Those are actually two separate issues. The successful criteria, successful commissioning gets deemed by us, and we don't actually make that determination until after the commissioning report is posted. The commissioning report usually gets posted about 30 days after sort of a lot of those activities happen. And so very often we're reviewing a commissioning report and deeming it successful or unsuccessful or sending back corrections in the aftermath of a project. The question of substantial completion has come up, and we haven't quite written a standard on it yet, but where we're going with that, I'll tell you where we're going with that, is that ultimately what we want to do is, in order for the general contractor to receive substantial completion, we want the commissioning agent to endorse the project for substantial completion. We have a couple of examples of commissioning agents who have done that. Basically, the commissioning agent needs to make two statements. Statement number one, all the issues that have come up within the issues log are resolved, or they have an immediate track to resolution in the next 30 to 45 days. Statement number two is that we've performed trending and all of the systems are working according to the design intent. If the commissioning agent can, even just in an email or a less than 100-word memo or letter, send that off to my engineer, Sandy or Glenn or Maya or Ben, then they would endorse that to me, and ultimately, organizationally, I think, at least within some of the regions, there's some desire for me to endorse the project for substantial completion prior to issuing substantial completion. My hope is that would be a rubber stamp all the way up, right? The commissioning agent endorses it, my engineer endorses it, I rubber stamp that, and then we gives out substantial completion.
Do you want to go over why on that?
No, I don't, because I don't want to give away our trade secrets.
Okay.
So the next question that came in was, where are all these standards? All of our standards are on InfoZone and should be on InfoZone. That's current up to the Clockworks Clean Bill of Health is now on InfoZone. So you can reference that off of InfoZone. It's under supporting documentation under Chapter 17. The contract is moving to InfoZone. That's still, I don't think that's live on InfoZone because it's very recently approved. But ultimately, that repository would be InfoZone. The other two documents that we have that are ready to go to InfoZone, but that are not currently sitting there, are we do have the naming convention. So if you're doing a controls design right now and you need a Kaiser standard naming convention for the points, then let us know. We have that. That should be on InfoZone shortly. And then we do have a master tritium spec that'll be up on InfoZone shortly. And so we had another question in there about the are we in fact supposed to use Clockworks for FDD? Hopefully, or for FDD, the answer is yes. Kaiser has an enterprise agreement with KGS and Clockworks for our fault detection and diagnostics. So anything that's taking place in the first year, Clockworks is our enterprise engine for that. And frankly, we want all the building data in one system. So we're not particularly interested in your project solution and why it's better than Clockworks, because having it in one spot for us is better than having it in 4 spots. But that being said, as I have already talked about, Clockworks has not yet successfully been used for the actual functional performance testing and connected commissioning on the project. So until we get there, that the other solutions are in play. We had a question, or we had multiple questions come up about Plan B. Just to be clear, Plan B is that if you assume one of two conditions, either that KPIT is not ready to have our commissioning agent be connected via our network to the BAS server, or that the BAS server is sitting on a local construction land and not yet ready to be cut over to KPIT. In either of those cases, neither of those cases should be unanticipated by your commissioning plan. And in either of those cases, we do expect you to perform connected commissioning up to and including bringing a suitcase out to the project with a mobile hotspot and connecting to the damn server yourself. The responsibility for Plan B and executing Plan B is on the commissioning agent. So they are entirely responsible for having a Plan B. Obviously, you should have a lot of stock in Plan A, but you do need to have a Plan B because you need to be connected by the time you do functional performance testing. We had some other questions for who has the responsibility for specifications and contract requirements in regards to bench testing. As Sandy's reviewed under the 2020 standard, the commissioning agent is absolutely a member of the design team, and the commissioning agent is actually issuing specifications. There's no more comments on specifications. The commissioning agent is issuing specifications, and they're a member of the design team. Now, if the engineer of record is issuing specifications for the rooftop package units, and we want to do bench testing of the rooftop package units as they leave the factory, then we absolutely expect that to be in the specs. The commissioning agent would coordinate that through the engineer of record, I would say, in the traditional manner. And we had another question come in to say, does the engineer of record need to incorporate the commissioning or incorporate the commissioning controls drawings onto their drawings? That's what we've seen so far, where the commissioning agent is the designer and they're issuing out controls drawings, but those controls drawings wind up having the letterhead of the engineer of record and the project architect. The other thing that we're seeing kind of commonly now is that the engineer of record and the commissioning agent are co-stamping those drawings, so they basically carry both names on the title block. But if the commissioning agent just wanted to issue the controls drawings with their own letterhead, according to our standards, that would be perfectly acceptable. I just haven't seen that yet. So now, going down the list here, can you elaborate on automated FPTs to be performed by the BMS, as mentioned by Sandy? I'll let you take that.
Yeah, so that's under the scenario where we would be using Clockworks for your data analytics package. And the automated functional testing would be programming that would have to be done by the building automation controls contractor. They have the ability to write a program that would put the building into full heating and full cooling. That's probably it's probably a little more costly to you to have that done. It's not going to be any more costly to Kaiser, but that is another way to do the connected commissioning.
We have what should start. It looks like the questions are getting more fun as we go, so we'll have more fun with these as we go. So here we have a question that says, what if the commissioning agent is not onboarded to the project until after the design? So after the control sequences are already written, after the points list, et cetera, are issued by the EOR. In that case, we expect the commissioning agent basically to take over and endorse the controls design. So if the engineer of record has already issued a controls design, and you think it's fantastic, and you think it's so fantastic that you're willing to put your professional engineer stamp on it, then that's what you do. If you don't think it's perfect and you're not willing to put your professional engineer stamp on it, well, we require your PE stamp on it. So you better go back and make the changes.
Hey, Travis.
You can issue that out under the engineer of record or co-stamp it with the engineer of record. But if there's already a controls design on the project, under the 2020 standard, the commissioning agent is responsible and accountable for the controls design on the project. So if it's not perfect and you're not willing to stamp it, then obviously you can't issue it. That's going to become a problem. So we also have a question in there that said, what happens if the commissioning agent identifies a design issue that the controls design can't fix, and the engineer of record refuses to make the required design changes, I think you have to escalate those through your project management chain of command, right? So that would get, if there's a dispute essentially between the engineer of record and the commissioning agent about the solution for the project, that would escalate up through the project architect, through the project manager. It would not be uncommon for that to come to us. We're available for that. Here's an interesting question. Is the acceptance criteria integrated into Clockworks? And the answer to that is no. We don't actually have, some of our acceptance criteria come from the Clockworks algorithms. We stole some of those ideas from Clockworks as we were developing acceptance criteria, but they're not hard programmed into Clockworks. And so the data analytics for the acceptance criteria is not currently programmed into Clockworks. The clean bill of health for Clockworks is something that obviously you don't have to touch in Clockworks, but the acceptance criteria themselves are not in there. We have a question here about the bench testing. Who is supposed to provide the bench testing and Plan B? And the answer there is that the commissioning agent is, or our commissioning service provider is responsible and accountable both for the bench testing and for Plan B. Responsible and accountable means that if it doesn't get done, then you're the one who is supposed to assure that it gets done. It does not mean that you wouldn't designate it. There's a ton of questions here, but I noticed that Long has his hand up. Should we unmute Long and let him in and then go back to quick Q&A?
Sure.
All right. See if I know how to unmute Long. I'm unaware how to unmute Long.
Can you hear me?
Long, we don't know how to unmute you. And
Are you able to unmute
Oh,
yourself?
wait, hold on.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Sweet. Hey, Travis. So I wanted to just revisit one item and note that, for main loan fund projects, a project commissioning plan is required as part of our schematic design approval, our regional approvals at CSC. So if there are projects I heard earlier, where you got through schematic and there's no commissioning plan, that's problematic on several levels. So please escalate that, if you find that that's the case. That's all.
Yeah, and we are working on some internal processes around that. I've been trying to work with Angeline and Ivan to come up with some internal processes around making sure that reporting happens on a monthly basis. Basically projects that pass that design completion threshold and either have outstanding design issues or do not have an approved commissioning plan. So I'll circle you in on that, Long, but that is absolutely something that we want to get done internally. To get back into the question box here, Steve Gutman. Hey, Steve, how's it going? Just in the process of completing my first Clockworks project, over 50% of the errors reported in the first few weeks were due to errors in their setting and assumptions about the SOOs. Should this be considered normal and in the CX budget time for this effort? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. We haven't had a building yet where we've connected it to Clockworks and it just comes up bright and shiny and clean and no faults. That has not happened yet, and I don't know if that's ever going to happen. So yes, absolutely. When you connect the building to Clockworks, you're going to have to look at those initial band of faults before we hand it over to our facilities operator. We want all the nuisance faults cleared, and we want to hand it over to them in a fault-free mode, or what we've defined as this Clockworks clean bill of health with a fault-free mode. What that means to you, since this is the first project that you connected Clockworks, you're going to see a whole ton of those faults come in, and you got to essentially start working your way through those lists. Some of our commissioning agents have already had that experience. The good news is the next project that you do, you'll know those in advance. The other good news is that you can get the algorithms for all of Clockworks faults from Clockworks before you connect the system. So there's no reason for any of those faults actually to be a surprise. But to answer your questions, it is absolutely true that the commissioning agent is going to need to is responsible for getting to that level of the clean bill of health. We've had another project recently where we're very likely going to award substantial completion because the project is passing the acceptance criteria. I mean, numerically, they're passing the acceptance criteria. However, they're 30 or 45 days away from their Clockworks being connected and starting to generate data. And we let the commissioning agent there know, hey, listen, once Clockworks is connected, there's more work that you're going to need to do to get us to that clean bill of health, and that is part of your responsibility.
Well, what I was going to add too is part of the implementation process for Clockworks is for the design team, which the controls designer is now the commissioning agent, to provide Clockworks with your controls design, submittals, and sequence of operation. That really helps them in the onboarding process. And then, like you said, if they're interpreting that wrong, then that's your responsibility to work with Clockworks to get those faults cleared up.
So we have an interesting question here. Will the controls contractor have network components in their scope? This is usually a stumbling block based on coordination of the automated functional tests. I don't know that I understand that.
Will the control contractor have the network wire? So that's like at Hesperia, the controls contractor was really more of an installation contractor.
And did all the runs.
Right, and he provided that equipment.
Right.
But the design was done by the commissioning agent.
Yeah, but I think maybe the spirit of the question is, make no mistake, being ready for connected commissioning on the day that you begin functional performance testing requires planning on the behalf of the general contractor, the Kaiser project manager, KPIT. Everybody needs to know that this network or plan B is going to be up and running on the day that we start functional performance test. Do not assume that that's just going to happen on your project without a significant heavy lift on the planning side for both the GC, the controls contractor, the commissioning team. It is very much not business as usual, but it is our expectation.
There's one on the clean bill of health.
Yeah, here's a clean bill of health. Yeah, the clean bill of health has a weekly metric for diagnostic priority codes. Can you ask Clockworks to add this metric to their project dashboard? The current dashboard contains cumulative metrics, but not weekly metrics. Actually, Steve, just change your setting on the dashboard. Right on the Clockworks homepage, you can read that as either weekly or daily or monthly. It's just kind of a way of, when you click into the diagnostic report, you can read it. And when we download it, you also want to so what we can do is just pull down those diagnostics, and you select weekly, and make sure that there's another checkbox that you have to unselect, because you do get junk diagnostics done with it when you do it wrong.
There's a really good one on acceptance criteria.
Which one? Does
Right
Kaiser
there,
review?
yeah.
Oh yeah, this is a great one. Does Kaiser review and approve the EOR's acceptance criteria? We've seen a lot of criteria that we spend time critiquing and helping the EORs to get right. That's a great point. And I think, like I said, acceptance criteria is new for the design engineers. When we first got into the acceptance criteria sort of notion, I hope you can all understand that acceptance criteria is a very powerful tool for objectifying the outcome of commissioning. When we say, listen, all your temperatures need to be ±2 for 90% of data, that's something that's numeric. It's no longer a matter of opinion between the commissioning agent and the general contractor and the design engineer whether or not the building complies. The building complies because the data says the building complies. Now, that being said, as you get up the chain in acceptance criteria to things like economizers, to things like kW per ton, to things like pump speed acceptance criteria, most of those we've written generic acceptance criteria and pushed those out, and we very much ask the engineers, the design engineers, to issue those in their specification based on their energy models and based on their design intent. And Steve, I don't think this will surprise you to hear me say this, but most of their energy models are wrong and they don't predict reality at all. And oftentimes the design intent is not clearly articulated. And so critiquing the acceptance criteria is absolutely something that I think we all should be doing. And trying to figure out, okay, what does it really mean to have a building that's working according to the design intent? And a good half of that is going to be that the design intent needs to needs to revise to match what actually happens in the buildings, right?
Yeah, I got a good example of that. And we do expect that the commissioning agent and the engineer of record will work together on that. So an example might be, so one of our standard criteria for air handling units or chill water systems, or air handling unit that's served by a chill water system, is plus or minus 2 degrees.
Right.
So we've run into a lot of issues with these packaged rooftop DX units where
It's just flat out unachievable.
yeah, there is no way. So that's something that we would want to see in the design. I mean, the engineer of record is, he's selecting the rooftop unit. You're designing the controls, so you need to come up with an acceptance criteria that is doable.
Right.
Because otherwise, we're going to be spinning our wheels trying to achieve something that just can't happen.
We got 15 minutes to go. We'll keep going with this stuff. And
Cybersecurity.
yeah, cybersecurity. Ultimately, so who's responsible for? I'll read the question. Who's responsible for ensuring cybersecurity related to fault detection, diagnostics, control system design? Those are two separate questions. It seems that these may require controls contractors and IT department participation in the design. Nailed it right in the question. This may also limit or affect how integration on equipment can be performed. So on the fault detection and diagnostics, Clockworks is fully authorized to deploy their system across KPIT. And I believe we've connected to just about every controls provider that you can imagine doing work on a Kaiser building. So from JCI, Siemens, whatever, on down the line, we've connected to every head end that you can imagine. And so the answer on the fault detection and diagnostics is that is a KPIT approved solution. That also must be the answer on design. We are internally, our enterprise standards are very much pushing towards virtual servers. We don't want physical servers. We absolutely do not want physical servers that are disconnected from KPIT. And so our direction in the future is to have standard virtual server packages, and those virtual server packages are fully KPIT approved. They've gone through our internal risk assessment process. And the KPIT design guy is fully embedded in both the architecture and the equipment that's going to go on the project. If your controls design, in fact, I believe within the standard, it says one of the criteria of the controls design that's done by the commissioning agent is that it is fully KPIT endorsed and approved. You cannot have an unapproved KPI controls solution with KPIT. And that's also not business as usual, by the way. We've had plenty of projects out there for the last 20 years.
There's a good question on the Plan B.
Okay. So you want to take that? Should Plan B be an add alternate or fully included in the proposal?
I would say it should be, it should be included in the proposal. It should be
so
part
too.
of your standard operating procedure.
Well, but I also don't want to pay for it unless we have to
Right.
execute it.
Well, if it's a hotspot, what are we talking about? I don't think we're talking about a whole lot of money here.
I have a hotspot on me right now. So,
right.
So whoever that is, I can
if we have
loan you mine at a very low. Okay.
And we had this come up on the next one on the, I can read it. Can you elaborate on the expectation for equipment controller bench testing? And I think the intent of the question is what happens for factory provided equipment? Are you going to the factory or lay down yard to do that? And there's multiple solutions to that. We're not expecting you to travel halfway across the country to go to someone's factory. Traditionally, they charge a lot for that. And you may not, at the end of the day, you may not even get what you want. That has to be coordinated with the specifications so the equipment vendors know they're bidding on it. And in today's world of connectivity, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to, over the internet, connect to that controller at the factory and run through the test and make sure that the points are there, right?
Yeah, the other lesson that we've definitely learned on that is that needs to be in the specification and something that you're going to include in the bid, right? If your spec says that, hey, listen, we expect to be able to connect remotely to this piece of equipment and see the up-facing backnet points, prior to it leaving the shipping yard. Then you can get a competitive bid on that. If you try to go back and add that later and say, oh, by the way, we'd like to connect to the piece of equipment, then the vendor already kind of has you over the barrel, and we've been unable to see that. I think some of these are think some of these are redundant. Here's a question that says, what if the controls design was completed by the controls vendor? That falls into the same category if the controls design was completed by an engineer of record. And that is to say that the commissioning, our commissioning authority is now the responsible and accountable party for the controls design. So if there's a controls design that was done by the controls vendor, and it's great and it's perfect, and you want to stamp and sign it and put your seal on it and move it forward and take responsibility and accountability for it, then that's fantastic. If it needs some changes prior to getting your seal on it, then you need to get those changes made prior to putting your seal on it. Can we get details of all the Clockwork specs so we can understand how it integrates? There is a decent Clockworks package up on InfoZone, and then I would urge you to review that material. And then we have ongoing communication with Clockworks about the algorithms and the faults and what those are. So we have some of that. So we have a pretty good amount of documentation that's already up on InfoZone, and we certainly, I mean, we're a pretty big customer to that company, and so we can get into whatever level of detail we need. We have a long question here. Some of the coordination efforts, like receiving all the controller programming points and network services from equipment distributors for approval prior to shipping, sounds like a challenging process. Good, we meant it to be a challenging process. In Oregon and Washington State, AIR reps and Johnson Barrows are two of the largest providers. This will really change the way things are handled. Has KP done any education with major equipment providers, or would your team be willing to help CX organizations with this education? I think absolutely we're interested in industry education. And I know Sandy's very active in BCA, and so we want to have these conversations out within the industry. It is, just to be clear, one of the things that happened with the 2020 standard, and I think some of you have heard us say this before, we essentially had a lot of commissioning providers, and we've had some of them that say, you know, we're not going to sign the contract. This is a level of responsibility and accountability that we're not willing to take on as a firm. And our response to that has generally been, you know, via con Dios, we're not going to miss you. We still have plenty of commissioning service providers that are interested in doing the work. But it's important to note, we believe that our 2020 commissioning standard is a change in the way of doing business of commissioning, and we are definitely we're sending out a demand signal that the industry needs to move forward by a significant technical degree. And so that's not accidental, and it's not a mistake, I'll say. Is Clockworks FDD required for small retrofit projects of any size? The Clockworks requirement in our standard kicks in at $750,000 of controls work.
250.
Oh, 250.
Yeah.
So there's $250,000 of controls work. Then that's when the Clockworks standard comes in. So that's when it's required by the KP design program. That being said, we've had some experience with projects where just that Clockworks is relatively cheap. Ultimately, what we pay for that is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5-7 cents a square foot. I think with the first year subscription fee, it's at 7 cents a square foot.
We also have the options for equipment costs, which we can share.
Right, and so there are often times where we're looking at a building, you know, that's a 60,000 square foot building or a 70,000 square foot building, and compared to a scope of work that's going on within the building, Clockworks is a very, very cheap way of getting some full-blown 10-month diagnostics going on in the building. And so we do make recommendations for Clockworks that are below that $250 threshold. In discussions with Clockworks, they will not onboard until the control system is finalized with as-builts. Is it a change in the approach to onboard prior to BAS system that does not exist?
As point to point,
Yes, you do need to have the point-to-point prior to them.
but not as
onboard.
boards. We just need a point to point verification.
Oh, okay, they need point-to-point. Right, and we're working through that on a couple of projects.
We just send them the controls drawings, which you know, under the new standard, the controls drawing should be as good as built.
They should be, right. The point-to-point should be complete. But again, I do want to be clear. Clockworks has not yet been used as the connected commissioning tool during functional performance testing. So we haven't quite gotten there yet, but I think we're going to. Maybe it would be a good idea to have Clockworks host a training for the clean bill of health for all commissioning agents. It wouldn't surprise me if there's Clockworks folks on the phone. I think we have this meeting having gone viral. They probably found their way to it. But I think that's absolutely something that's open, is to have Clockworks start talking to the commissioning agents about those faults. So if there's some good interest in that, maybe email me and let me know what you think the topics and what the agenda for that might be.
Well,
I think we can orchestrate that.
So Travis, they usually do a kickoff for Clockworks. And
They do.
cover all that in that kickoff meeting.
Right. Yeah, that's true. They also do provide the project support, right? And they'll, if you ask the Clockworks guys for documentation, they will, be prepared to spend the next 3 weeks reading it, right? So here's an interesting question. Why is connected CX required if IT is not ready? Why do we need to be connected to the cloud during FPT and training? I understand the benefits of automated FPT and acceptance, but why is the cloud connection required? So as we said, with we do kind of have this plan B expectation, Jeff, where even if KPIT is not ready and onboarded, we still want to see connected commissioning. And I'll be honest with you, we started with acceptance criteria around 2017, I think, right around the time one of my engineers, Tom Langford, left. Is when we started this thing about objective acceptance criteria for the projects. And for about the next 2 years, we saw a lot of activity of controls vendors and commissioning agents trading Excel files back and forth and not being able to get Excel files, and Excel files not having the right information in them. And there was so many of those goddamn stories that we really just became convinced that trading Excel spreadsheets should be an unacceptable practice. And so that's why we've gone to this connected commissioning. We live in an era now where, I mean, these building systems are generating data, and then we have all these other systems on the other side that are capable of reading data and doing analytics, et cetera. And so we're really just pushing towards that. We've got to connect the dots on those two things. We have 5 minutes left, and more than 5 minutes worth of questions here. There's a. You want to pick your favorite of what's left, and I want to thank everyone for being here. I hope you understand that this is an open, it's definitely kind of an open topic, an open conversation. We know that our 2020 standard is kind of, well, we hope that it's industry leading, and so I am not under the impression that we're done writing it yet, or that there's some things that we need to strike and re-edit. So please do stay in touch, and we'll keep the conversation going and move it forward. Did you want to pick your favorite of the last ones, or you want to just call it?
I mean, I think there's a few. I think we can. I mean, we could probably follow up on some of these questions.
Yeah, we do. We have the whole chat box in the meeting, and so I'll make sure that if you have a question in there, then we'll.
It looks like there's a couple of questions on, where was this one? Here, we continue to experience challenges on smaller equipment change-out projects in an existing building where the MEOR has already done the design. If the commissioning agent is unwilling to put their stamp on the drawings, there are added costs to go back and perform a redesign. How the KP project manager will figure that out, how to proceed.
There is an escalation process, and so we're not under the impression that all commissioning agents and engineers of records are going to get along perfectly and hold hands all the times, and so there is absolutely an escalation process.
Right.
And so follow that.
Yeah. And
I get 2 of those calls a week, and so you're not going to shock me by telling me that story. And I think those are just the ones that make it up through my other engineers.
And so Brian asked scroll up a little bit. Brian asked an interesting question about the third party that I think you addressed a little bit.
Right. So lead still requires a third party. I'll tell this story. Maybe this is a good little story to close on. Is the commissioning agent, if the commissioning agent does controls design, how is the commissioning agent considered a third party? So I think lead will still consider you a third party. We haven't actually broached that with the USGBC, but the commissioning agent is not the engineer of record. You are not sizing the systems. You're not doing the load calcs. So you're not the engineer of record under the project, under the architect of record under the project.
And nor are they an employee of the engineer of record either.
Right, and you're also not contracted via the architect. You are directly contracted by the owner on the projects over 10 million. That being said, one of the big things that happened with this commissioning 2020 standard is that, you know, we had to get this contract approved through legal. And so there was this idea that the commissioning agent is a third party and a watchdog to the engineer of record, and therefore cannot have responsibilities on the design team, because that would essentially put him in the henhouse that he's supposed to be guarding. And the response to that is objective acceptance criteria. Now that we have identified, you know, our building doesn't work because it's the commissioning agent's opinion that our building works, or that's the design engineer's opinion that it works. Our building is designated to be working because the data says that it's working, and it matches the objective and numeric acceptance criteria that we wrote down at the beginning of the project. And if it's not working according to that, then it's not working. And so that's the answer to the third part. The third party was supposed to provide a check and balance against differing opinions. But when you remove the subjectivity about what building is working and what building is not working, then that check and balance essentially becomes unnecessary. And that's where we're moving in the connected world. And that's where, you know, 10 years from now, when we see large portfolios of buildings connected to FTD systems, that's where we're going to be. There will no longer opinions will be conflicting opinions won't happen about the data. It'll be what to do with the data. So that's a decent enough place to close. Thanks for joining. May you all be well, and everyone that you love, may you all be well, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.